Hi, welcome to Ask Me Anything, our office hours at Rouxbe. My name is Dan Marek. I'm the Director of Plant-Based Culinary and Development here at Rouxbe. And during these sessions, we invite you to ask any culinary questions of any of our instructors, and we answer them live for you. So the way you can actually do this is just by clicking on the box to the right-hand side of this video where it says Add Question Here. Type in your question and click the black button, and it'll actually add this to the queue. They are moderated, so they won't show up right away. But when it does, you'll see it in our queue on the right-hand side, and you can actually just hit the heart icon to be able to upvote it. So if you see other questions in the queue that you'd like to be able to upvote to get to answer quickly, just do that and click on the heart on the right-hand side. So we're going to dive right into our questions today because we have quite a number of them, and we're excited to be able to get to them as well. Again, if you do have questions, you can always add them anytime during this, and we will put a close questions once it's time to close out our questions, and you'll see that you can't add any questions past that point. So let's get started here with a question from Amy. Hello, Chef. Do you have any books, podcasts, or websites that you recommend? Thank you. So that's actually a great question. There are so many different things out there and tons of different books. You know, I used to tell people for years that my favorite book is a cookbook, if you will, was the Flavor Bible. Now they have a couple different versions of the Flavor Bible. They have the traditional Flavor Bible and the vegetarian Flavor Bible. I actually own both of them. And basically, what that book is it's a list of ingredients in alphabetical order, and they show what those ingredients pair with, which is a great tool for any chef or home cook, because you can basically go through and find great pairings and great ideas of different flavors that really fit well together. You'll find that there aren't any actual recipes in the book, but it's a great way to be able to find inspiration and be able to look for different pairings for those. So that's always one of my number one recommendations for a cookbook, even though it's not a cookbook. Now, there are some other ones that came out this past year that actually got some great recognition. One of them was the James Beard Award-winning vegan Korean, or it's the Korean. In fact, I have the book right over here. I need to. Uh, I can't remember what it is, but I think it's vegan Korean. Is another one of those. There's also let's see. Another favorite is actually the To Asia with Love, which is a great cookbook, kind of showing traditional-ish kind of Asian dishes. Now, depending on what kind of cooking you like to do, for kind of very straightforward, kind of here's exactly what to do on a bunch of different recipes. The Milk Street cookbook for vegans is actually a pretty good one. My wife is a big fan of the Oshi Glows cookbook, just because it really kind of sets things out for her in the way that she likes to be able to follow them. But yeah, those are probably some of the books I would recommend. And sorry, I have a little bit of a cold, so I might cough a couple times on this too. But podcasts are very unique to each person, so there are a lot of different podcasts that I listen to that I really love listening to. Some of them are like carryovers from like NPR, like the Splendid Table has always been a favorite of mine, with the old host and the new host, actually. There are a lot of different ones that kind of work for some people, though. Like, I really like David Cheng's podcast, but I know he's not everybody's cup of tea, because he's definitely got a different style of presenting and comes from a very chef-centric kind of a place. Um, and he's not at all vegan, so I do know that Rich Roll is a vegan podcast. It's a very popular one. Same with the Engine 2 podcasts, but all really great, podcasts to go with those. Now, website wise, wow, there's just so many different ones out there. It's really hard to, I'd have to list like tons and tons of them to be able to go through. And, partly the way I find those is by looking through recipes. So if I'm looking for a specific recipe, I'll come across different ranked recipes. And depending on how the recipe reads, I might explore further into their websites to be able to see those. And there's some that you look for personality, and then some you look for actual recipes. The personality wise, there's a lot of fun, vegan, personalities out there, and some of them know how to recipe or write a recipe, and some of them don't. So that's a little bit of self exploration that I invite you to be able to do. So I hope that helps, Amy. I can see that Patrick is adding links to all of these as I go here, which is great, to be able to see all of these podcasts and all these different the Plant Strong podcasts. Sorry, thanks, Patrick. So those are all great different podcasts and books to be able to check out. All right, our next one, Phyllis. When I try to make lentil burgers, they always fall apart. What's a good mixture to use to bind the lentil burgers with? This is a very common problem. So you're not alone, Phyllis. Probably one of the, most common binders for a burger, like if we're looking in the non-plant based sense, is an egg. So what we're going to do is look for something like an egg replacer. So you can go with something like a flaxseed or an aquafaba. It's actually a really good way to be able to do that. Now, specifically with a lentil burger, what I like to do is actually use something like an aquafaba, which is actually just the water from the can of chickpeas. Strong protein source in there. And what I'll do is I'll put lentils and the aquafaba in together and blend them in a blender together to make kind of a sauce. And then I'll take the rest of my ingredients from the lentil burger and then put them together, and you'll find that it holds a lot better because you're using the protein rich aquafaba and the protein from the lentils, and it makes this really great binder to be able to hold together as well. So that's probably what I would recommend, specifically for the lentil burgers, an aquafaba mixture. But there are, a lot of different kind of egg replacers, and that's probably where you want to be able to start. So feel free to experiment with a couple of those. But I'll bet you that the aquafaba and the lentil mixture will probably be the best bet for you. Hope that helps, Phyllis. All right, Patricia. I want to learn about cooking tempeh. The protein content interests me, and I want to be able to enjoy it. Yeah, so that's great. Tempeh is a wonderful protein source to be able to use. It's a little less processed than tofu, so you can actually see the actual soybeans in it. Has a little bit different nutritional content to it, but it's wonderful. I actually love to be able to kind of mix and match tempeh and tofu depending on what I'm making. One of the best tips I can give you for cooking tempeh is to boil it first, actually. Tempeh has kind of a funky little flavor to it just from the process that is used to be able to make it. So I always tell people to just get a saute pan and put water into it and drop the tempeh into it to be able to boil it first. Take it back out, and then you can just pat it dry with a towel. And then I basically start to work with it. Now, I'll do it in a myriad of different ways, from baking it to be able to make, like a bacon style flavor for like BLTs or TLT, if you will, a tempeh lettuce tomato. And I've also, I just made it the other night as a curry dish that literally just sauteed it in like a standard, Americanized yellow curry, powder, and then did a dish kind of around that as well. When I was working with schools, Chef and Foundation actually came up with this dish called the Crazy Curry Bowl, and it was for a school dish. So it was just that yellow curry, pepper, and salt, and we did that kind of sauteed out, and you take out that mix, and then you put in, you just want to saute onions. We did broccoli with it, snow peas. I'm trying to think of what else. I think that was kind of it. And then you put the tempeh back in, and then cover it with coconut milk, and then add a little bit more of your curry and serve it over rice. It's so, so good. My kids actually love that dish. They'll just pick out the tempeh pieces and eat it piece by piece because it's so tasty. So yeah, cooking with tempeh. It's one of my recommendations always is just to be able to boil the tempeh first, and then start to use it as you want. You can also crumble it into different, things if you want to make it into like a sloppy Joe kind of a mix or something like that too. But baking it is probably one of my favorite ways to do it, or do a saute on it. So I hope that helps, Patricia. Elizabeth, how do I take my passion for food to a profitable business? Well, that's a pretty big question, Elizabeth. And that's really depending on what you want to do for a business. I always like to tell people when you're looking to do businesses like that and you're kind of looking for, either the side hustle or something to be able to go as a full time thing, is look at what you're passionate about in that area and follow that, right? So if you're looking to make a passion or a profitable business out of food, it's great that you have the passion for it. So be able to take that passion and see what part of that you want to actually go further down. And it might be something like catering. It might be, maybe it's, food styling where people, do different stylings for photographs. Maybe it's doing photography of food. It could be recipe building. It could be writing books. There's a ton of different avenues to go down when it comes to food. And the nice thing is that those are becoming a lot more acceptable now. And people are getting a little more used to having those as full time careers and looking at that in a different way. So, um, yeah, but such a big question, a little hard to narrow down without knowing you personally and actually sitting down with you for a couple hours to see how that would work out for you. So, hope that helps a little bit with that question, Elizabeth, and good luck. So, Carol, I try to cook without oil as much as possible. In instances where oil is used, what would be your suggestion for the healthiest? What is your opinion on coconut oil? Thank you very much. So, let's see. There's a couple things in there. So, oil, basically, if you're trying to cook out without oil, that's great. A lot of people doing a whole food plant based diet try to avoid oil as much as possible, primarily just because it's 120 calories per tablespoon, no matter what kind of oil you actually use. I personally do use oil. I just don't use it in massive quantity. Very rarely will you see me deep frying something. In fact, maybe once or twice a year. And I don't deep fry it either. I'll put just more oil than I normally would in the bottom of a pan and fry it and then flip it. I'm not actually submerging something in oil. And those are usually like latke or something like that. And it's usually for the holidays. So it's something a little bit more decadent, right? But when it comes down to cooking with oils, is there the healthiest ones? Not really, because I mean, they're basically none of them really have any kind of nutrient value to them because they've been stripped away to be able to make the oil. Is what we know is just the fat. I personally like to use avocado oil, but other people are going to tell you different things. So I use like a spray version of the avocado oil. If I don't have a spray thing, I'll just put like a dab into a pan and then wipe down the pan if I need a nonstick surface. I don't use it all the time though, right? So if, I'm only going to do that if I need specifically a flavor profile from it, like sesame oil or olive oil, where I'll typically add the oil at the end of the dish to be able to get the flavor out of it. Coconut oil, again, people like the flavor of it. People say it's one of the healthier oils. That's debatable at most. So I really think that if you're looking for flavor, pick the flavor that you want and just, don't overdo it with oil. Try to use as little as possible because really you're just talking about the calories that are coming from it, unless it's the flavor, right? And most people, when they say, "Oh, I like the flavor of olive oil," but they're cooking with it, if you go above 100 or 350 degrees, you're, losing the flavor anyways. It's actually better to add olive oil to a dish afterward if you really like the flavor, which is fine. So yeah, there's not really the greatest answer for that one. It's just, if you're not trying to cook with oil, use it as little as possible. I personally like to use avocado oil, out of all the different ones. Some people like, olive, coconut is one of those ones too that people do like, but don't have a whole lot of opinions on any of them because I don't use them very much. Except for, like I said, just a little bit of a dot or a spray down on something. And that's pretty much the extent of what I do use. All right, here's a question from Jules. Which sweeteners are best to worst, and how much should be considered per day or consumed per day? That's another pretty big question. So that's a wide variety of different sweeteners from best to worst. Probably corn syrup, probably being on the bottom of that list, or even some of the diet sweeteners that they have now, like is it aspartame? Apparently, not really a great choice for something that goes on the worst side. On the best side, dates is pretty much what I use. Dried fruit, apples, apple sauce, apple juice, but typically something in its more whole environment. So I'm going to use dates, apricots, apple sauce, something like that to be able to get the sweetener out of something. So, if it's dates, depending on what you're doing, you might be able to just make them into a date paste by adding water and blending it up. It really, that's a pretty big, wide comparison between like a date and something like high fructose corn syrup, because you're still getting all the fiber with something like the date. Now, how much should be consumed per day is totally up to the person as well, right? So, again, the date's much better because you're getting all the fiber with those. If it's you're actually eating the fruit itself, you're getting all the fiber and the nutrients that come with that. Whereas the high fructose corn syrup, everything has been stripped away pretty much except for the sugar. So you're not really getting any nutrients out of it. So you don't really want to do too much of that per day, if at all. With the dates, you can eat a lot more of it. With the high fructose corn syrup, probably not too much of it. Beyond that, there's a huge variety between those, between like actual fruit, like an apple, down to the high fructose corn syrup. And there's a huge variety between those. So we don't have enough time to go through every single one of those, best to worst, but there's kind of your end of spectrum. So looking for the whole, sweetener versus something that's highly processed. Hope that helps a little bit. Here's another one from Jules. Can you discuss making mayo and sauces, cashews versus soy, pros and cons? Yeah, sure. So mayo's a little different on this from cashews. I haven't really made much mayo from cashews. I have done a ton of different sauces from them, and I guess I've made like an aioli from a cashew before, but it's not quite the same consistency as a mayonnaise would be. Most vegan mayonnaise are oil based, and I've done it out of an aquafaba, before, and oil as well. But just to be able to get the fat for the mayo content, it typically is going to be an oil. In conventional mayonnaise, it's going to be, they're adding an egg white to it with fat to be able to get that mayo consistency. Quite honestly, I don't really use mayo that much. But now on the sauce end, I use cashews and soy all the time, depending on what I'm looking to be able to do. So for those two in particular, you're talking about basically fat versus not fat, looking at cashews versus soy. And those are two different ways to be able to deliver flavor. Now, some things need a fat to be able to help deliver the mouthfeel and the flavor profiles that you're looking for. Now, for cashews, I might do something like like a bechamel or a white sauce for pasta or something like that. I can do an Alfredo doing cashews, same way. But if I were to do a bechamel or like an Alfredo with soy, I would have to add a bunch of other things to it to be able to get the fat and the mouth sensation that I'm looking for out of an Alfredo. Because in a traditional Alfredo, it's pretty much just all fat, right? We're looking at like a milk and a couple different kinds of cheeses that are in an Alfredo sauce. So if you're looking to recreate that in a vegan style, you're going to need the fat, and the cashew actually is a great substitute for something like that. Now, in soys, there's a lot of other things to do with those too. Like for sauces, a lot of times I'm, going to, if I'm going to use soy, it might be something like a silken tofu. So, a lot of people might do a cashew like Caesar dressing, or I might do a silken tofu in that Caesar dressing instead. So using the same herbs, in the dressing, but I would actually use a silken tofu because then I'm getting the protein that I want out of it. I'm not getting a ton of fat out of it, and I'm still getting a lot of the flavor profiles. Now, do they carry the flavor of the herbs as much? Not as much, but I typically try to use fresh herbs when I'm doing something like that. Like if I'm making like a ranch or, a Caesar dressing, I'm going to use fresh herbs in that to be able to make sure that the flavors really pop if I'm using something like a silken tofu. Pardon me. Now, other ways that I'm actually using soy might be something like, an Asian style sauce using tamari or, a soy sauce or a shoyu or something like that. And those are things, very different where, if you want to add cashew or something to it to get that the fat in it, that's totally fine as well. But a very different flavor profile in each one of those. So really what we're looking at is the mouthfeel and how it can carry the flavors in both of those, and the cashews versus the soy. So those are pros and cons kind of in different ways there. So I hope that helps, Jules. All right, Errol, how can someone who has a busy life working and studying and needs to eat healthy can easily get used to food prep at the minimum and gradually progress so that it does not seem to be a burden? All right, Errol, so that's a very common question, especially with people just kind of getting used to eating in a lifestyle this way, or just, used to not ordering or eating out all the time. And that is something that you're going to have to practice over time to be able to perfect. It's not something that's going to come instantly. I don't know which class you're registered in at the moment, but for a couple of our classes, we have a couple ways to be able to look at those, and those are meal preps. So on our plant-based pro, there's actually a live event that I did. You can actually also look that up in our live events to be able to do meal prepping. And if you are in the beat class or the um, there's another one from Forks Over Knives. There's a couple materials in there too, and there's actually a sidebar with those on where I spent basically an entire hour showing you how to break things down. The long and the short of it is basically to take one day a week and do most of your prep on that day, so it makes the rest of the week easier. So what I personally do is I'll go shopping on one day of the week. It could be a Friday, it could be a Sunday, just depending on what your schedule is. And I'll go out to the store, and when I get home, I'll put everything away in the freezer and everything away in the pantry. But then I'll get a cutting board out and start chopping up my vegetables and my, tofu or tempehs and proteins, stuff like that. And I'll chop them up into the usable size pieces that I need for the week. I've already got a list of all the menu items that I want for the week in my family, and I know pretty much kind of at least I know what every dinner is going to be, and I kind of know what every lunch is going to be. And breakfasts are pretty much standard the same almost. Not every day, but like we switch like every 2 or 3 days for what they are. And so what I'll do is I'll prep all my ingredients ahead of time. That way, when it comes to dinner time, when I get out of work, I can literally just go into the kitchen and start prepping my meal by just starting to cook it all because all of the ingredients have been cooked. My tofu's been marinated. Everything that has to be done ahead of time or that takes a lot of the time from cooking has already been taken out of the process. So that's definitely one of my best pieces of advice to be able to give is to be able to prep everything ahead of time. Now, on the beet course and the Forks Over Knives meal prep courses, we kind of show that how to do that and break it up into weeks basically on ways to be able to make that happen. So you can do all the prep for one week, lay it out for yourself, and repeat some of the dishes a couple times, right? So and then some of the ingredients that you're going to be using are going to be used in multiple meals, right? So if you have the opportunity to dice all your onions, you can dice them all up for like 5 different meals instead of just one meal, and we have to dice that the whole every single night. So some of those are some of the best ways to be able to kind of start some of that meal prep, and really it'll take you less time the more you do it, right? So the first time it's going to seem really arduous. It's going to seem like, oh man, I'm taking way too much time on this one day. But the more you get used to it, you'll start to get a rhythm of it. And then just get containers that fit in your fridge really well. So you can literally just pick and choose when you get to your fridge. And when you get there, you can, even if you want to go off menu, you can say, what country do I want to go to tonight? And, make a meal kind of to fit the flavor profile that you're looking for that night. So I hope that helps a little bit, Errol. It's basically just a little bit of forward prep time is going to help you in the long run. All right, here's one from Susan. I'm wanting some direction in buying some stainless steel cookware. If I only buy one good fry pan to start, how to determine quality, size, and suitable for pan tossing, and where to purchase? All right, so that's a good question, Susan. So if you're buying just one good pan, a fry pan is a good one to be able to do. So it's it really kind of depends on what your big purposes are. So size wise, you don't want to go any bigger than 12 inches. Pans are typically like the 12. When I say 12 inches, that's actually the base of the pan. So it's going to be sitting on your burner. And most stoves, like home stoves at least, aren't going to hold bigger than a 12-inch pan. At least the cooking surface on it, not so much bigger than that. So I would say anywhere from 10 to 12 inches, kind of depending. 12 is pretty big though, so it might even just be a 10-inch pan. If you're looking to be able to do stainless steel, there are a lot of different options out there. Like if you're looking for kind of some higher end, All Clad is definitely a brand that I actually love. where it was like every year or two I would get a new pan because it's expensive. So I'd basically save up and get a new pan, and that was years ago. So now I have a whole set of all clad that I purchased a long time ago, but they're lasting 25 years for me, and I still have the exact same stainless steel pans. There's a new brand called Made In. It's supposed to be a really good quality one, but again, kind of a higher price. One of the big things, if you're just looking for stainless steel, make sure it's a solid stainless steel, that the handle is connected to the pan in a, typically in a way that it's not going to move. I've seen some pans where you hold on to it has like a plastic handle. You don't want like a plastic handle, and if it's like screwed on, you can see like a where it's screwed in. Typically not the best pan, but really as far as going beyond the 10-inch, looking at the stainless steel, there's a lot of different brands out there, and really picking out what works for you, especially to price point, is really that's really the best way to be able to start with it. Try out a couple in, go look at a couple in the store that you're going to. Where to purchase, there could be all kinds of ways. I definitely recommend going to some of the higher end stores to look at them, but maybe not purchase them all the time. So there are different places like home supply places they're great for those, from Sur La Table to there are a lot of different specialty cook stores that you can go and look at things and actually have them in your hands, be able to look at all the creases, the quality of them, and then also ask somebody about them and what makes this $250 pan different than this $30 pan. Finding a stainless steel saute pan and 10-inch might be a little hard at the $30 price range, but the $50 price range, you could probably find a couple different options that would work for you. I hope that helps a little bit. I don't want to zero like here's the perfect pan, because there is no perfect pan. It's really about what feels good in your hand, what works on your stove, and how big you want something as well. I think a 10-inch saute pan is probably good. A fry pan is good for those too. Just the only difference between saute pan and fry pan is the lip. A fry pan has like a rounded lip or edge around the outside, and a saute pan has more of like a scoop on it, so you can like actually toss something on it. So if you're looking to do pan tossing, a saute pan might work for you as well too. All right, our next question is from Jules. What are the best food or herbs for inflammation? Well, there's a pretty big list on that. In fact, Patrick, I saw we had a list here of inflammation herbs that I'll let him post on this. But ginger is probably the top of my list that I would say on this. Turmeric, definitely good. A lot of people take turmeric as a supplement daily to be able to prevent inflammation as well too. Garlic, I do hear in some ways is actually great as anti-inflammatory food. But turmeric, ginger are probably the top two on my list to be able to say like that's probably the two that I would look at as far as foods that are anti-inflammatory. Now, there's a huge list of different ones to be able to do, but if you're really working on anti-inflammation, can't even say that word, inflammation. I'm going to say it wrong again. Turmeric is probably one of your best, along with ginger. Inflammation. Thank you, Patrick, is in my ear saying it so I can say it correctly. Inflammation. I think it's just spelled weird there. But anyways, so Patricia, not a question. Just wanted to tell you I learned a lot from your video about taking care of food after arriving home with it from vegetable, both mise en place and vegetables. Oh, that's great. I'm so glad that you learned that from us, Patricia. That's actually one of the things I was just talking about with one of our questions earlier about when you get home, really taking the time with it and making sure that you're going to use it to the best of its quality, and really making that mise en place so you can use it well. Because if you have all your veg prepped and it's in the fridge, at the worst case, the end of the week, you can make a stir fry or a soup or something like that. But I also love it because I can just take little bits of the veg out and snack on it. So if I'm, need a snack during the day, I can just grab, a couple pieces of red pepper or carrot or something out because I've had all that mise en place in my fridge. So thanks for the compliment, Patricia. All right, so Toki, suffering from cravings and overeating, how to construct a balanced plate. Is it protein, fats? Is it carb? Is it necessary to do this for every meal? So I'm a chef, not a nutritionist or a doctor. So everybody's body is completely different. I always say your diet's like a fingerprint. It's completely different from anybody else on the planet, including your siblings, right? You all grew up in different environments with different things that were going on in your lives at different times, and your food that you had early in your life really reflects the way that your body adapts to food later in life. So everybody's diet's going to be completely different. Do you need fats, proteins, and carbohydrates? Yes. Those are three essential things you need to have every single day. I always laugh at people that are like, oh, I'm doing a no carbohydrate diet. And it's like, yeah, you're doing carbohydrates. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here talking to me because your brain needs carbohydrates to survive. What they're talking about is, processed carbohydrates and a completely different thing. So, protein, fats, carbs, you definitely want all those things on your plate. Is it necessary to do it for every meal? Not really, but you'd be surprised at where you find those three things in every single, when you're doing different, snacking or things like that as well too. Now, when it comes to craving and overeating, this is an area where you want to look at things a little bit differently, right? So you can make your whatever plate, whatever recipes you want for dinner and for your lunch and stuff. When you're looking at cravings or overeating, look at ways to be able to react to that a little bit. So, like I said earlier, with making your mise en place and having things in the refrigerator, that's a great thing because I can go in there and get that like red pepper out and snack on a red pepper because there's barely any calories to it, right? Just the raw red pepper. As I just take it out and I'm snacking on it, I'm getting a crunchy sensation from it. So it's appeasing some of the other senses, right? So if you're looking for something like a snack, that's a great way to be able to do that. Now, that works on cravings too. So if you're craving something and you're like, okay, I really want that something from an old diet, right? Say it's like I'm craving chips. That crunchy sensation from that red pepper actually helps with that. When I worked with schools, getting kids to eat better things was always a tough thing to be able to do. And I had a teacher that I met one time as I was training them on different cooking techniques and nutrition. And she said that she got kids to stray away from Takis, which is like a little spicy sour chip. And there were hot Takis, which they were really into, by getting them to eat slices of cucumber, which had a little crunch to it, but then putting hot sauce on the cucumber to be able to have that and then squeeze lime juice on it. So that was the way that she got them to really get the sensation of the really hotness that they really liked to be able to kind of challenge each other with, and then the really sour coming from the lime. Now, what that's doing is it's helping with that craving at the same time too. So, not saying you're loving Takis or anything like that, but looking at that flavor profile and then getting the crunch, the acid, and the heat out of those things, those are great things to be able to replace a craving. For that select set of kids. Now, I definitely challenge you to be able to do some of the same things in your own diet. If there's something that you're really craving, you're like, you know what, I just really used to like this dish and I don't have it anymore. Look for a plant-based version of that or a plant-based whole food plant-based version of it. I just recently moved back to the Midwest after being gone for wow, about 25 years. And there's certain dishes here that I totally forgot about. One of them was it's like an Italian sausage with red and green peppers cut up and then sauteed with onions and then put into like a big hoagie bun. And I was like, wow, I totally forgot about that because I've been plant-based so long. I haven't even thought about it. And being away from the Midwest, I wasn't exposed to it as much. But being around family members, they're like, oh, what would we do to be able to do that? And so I made it for them. And what I did was I made a seitan sausage with a little bit of red pepper flake and some of the heat in the seitan sausage, and sliced it on the bias, and then did my red peppers, green peppers, and onions, and sauteed all those up, and then put it into a whole wheat bun, and then put it's like I think it's called jardine, which is like a kind of an olive kind of mixture over the top, and then put a little pasta kind of marinara thing over it. And everybody's like, "This is exactly what we were looking for." And what I was doing was just replacing a beloved dish of theirs, giving the same flavor profile that they were used to, but didn't have any meat in it. And instead of using the white bun, I was using a whole wheat bun. I wasn't using oil in it. The seitan, arguably, it does have a whole wheat gluten, so it is processed in there, but it's not as bad as eating, the original version, just coated with all the oil. And I think that the Jardine typically is like a really oil heavy one where I just chopped up different oils or different olives in them and kept the oil out of it as well too. So looking to be able to appease those cravings, just look for an alternative version to be able to make those work. That was a little bit of a long answer, Tookie, but I hope that helps. All right, Lisa, how do you properly clean vegetables? Well, that depends on the vegetable. Water is really the best easy answer to say. Though, what I always tell people is, uh, you know, just water is the best way to be able to do it before you're prepping your vegetables. You just want to be able to run, the vegetables under water, use your hands to be able to wipe them off. If it's something like, I don't know, mushrooms, there's brushes that you can use to be able to get some of the dirt off. You don't have to run them under water. There's a debate on mushrooms and water, which if you do use water or if you're not going to. My consensus is you don't use water on mushrooms until right before you use them and you dry them off really well. But use that brush beforehand. Certain things like berries, using a strainer and really, rinsing them really well to be able to get into all the little crevices and cracks. Same with broccoli. Sometimes I'll fill up a bowl or a sink with water and submerge things into it, like spinach or greens. Sometimes I'll do that and then push down on the top of the spinach to be able to make sure all the dirt settles down to the bottom. On something like that, or apples and oranges are a great way to be able to do that too, where you can wash off the wax that's on the outside of those by submerging them in, just a lukewarm liquid at the same time. But water is always the best thing I say. Some people say put just a touch of vinegar into, the water to be able to help clean those, and that works as long as you don't do too much, so you don't alter the flavor of the vegetables as well. All right, so Anne, falling in love with my acai berry bowl, how do I make an acai sorbet? Do I need an ice cream maker, and what's the best source for acai paste? So sources for acai paste, there's tons and tons of them. I don't have a best one. I see a lot of people selling them now just in like packets, especially for smoothies. Pardon me. Um, and those typically work pretty well. Now, if you're making a berry bowl, I think you're pretty much on your way there for making a sorbet already. So, as your base for your berry bowl, if you have the acai and you have like the base of it, um, instead of doing it in like a regular ceramic bowl, put it in a metal bowl and then put that bowl in your freezer. And then about every 10 minutes, take it out and then take a fork or a whisk and then just scoop the outside of it and make sure that all the outside is scraped down. And you're putting it in the center. Put it back in the freezer and then for another 10 minutes, maybe 5 to 10, depending on how frozen it's getting. Take it back out, scrape down the outside with it again and the inside. I use a fork or a whisk just because it kind of breaks it up a little bit, but a spatula would work as long as you're breaking it up a little bit. So if you continue that process, it'll end up making an ice cream, or a sorbet out of it. So you don't actually need an ice cream maker. Pardon me one. So you won't actually need the ice cream maker from doing something like that. So that's probably what I would recommend, is just using that metal bowl and then scraping down the side with a fork or a spatula or a whisk. Hope that helps, and enjoy, Anne. All right, here's one from Ken. Dan, could you please tell me a good way to make spice rubs adhere to tofu? Thanks. Yeah, so that's actually I typically don't have a lot of problem with getting spice rubs to stick to tofu so much because tofu is so wet, right? So if you don't press your tofu, typically you can just take it right out and cut it up and then have it, toss it in your spice mix, and it'll stick to it. I do a technique with that all the time when I use an air fryer for tofu, because I'll use like basically a little bit. Actually, you know what? I do add a little tamari to it to be able to make that happen. So, what I would do, like for this version I'm thinking of, is like in an air fryer method. And I do this as a no oil, but you basically take your bowl and you make a marinade, right? So My marinade for that one in particular is a little bit of tamari, a little bit of garlic powder, a little bit of paprika, and a little bit of onion powder. Like you can mix your, powders or any kind of marinade you want into that as well. But I'll put that in the bottom of the bowl and then cut up my tofu into about 1.5 inch cubes and then toss it into it. So it just slightly coats the outside. You don't want it like dripping, and you don't want a ton of liquid at the bottom of the bowl when you're done either. So after you get that and it just adheres a little bit to that, you'll see that it kind of sticks to the outside of it. So what I'm doing is basically putting my spices into the liquid, tossing that, blending it up, and then tossing the tofu inside of that, and that actually sticks really well. Now, after I do that process, I'll take another bowl of dried cornstarch and then toss it in that because the the tofu is slightly wet after doing that process, so then that cornstarch will stick to it. Then I put it into the air fryer and put it on at like 400 for 10 minutes, and it comes out really, really crispy. Now, at that point, I'll typically throw it into a saute of some point and use another sauce to be able to adhere to the outside. But then I get this really, really crispy fried like tofu, which works really, really well. But to start it is basically making a little bit of marinade, a wet marinade, tossing it so it sticks to it, and then putting the dry marinade into it as well too. Hope that helps. But that's the way I do it at home. All right, so stands. I recently switched into induction cooking and love how fast it is, but I'm having trouble getting my conventional pressure cooker to pressure without burning the bottom of the food. Any suggestions? So those are two things I don't have a lot of experience with, induction burning or pressure cookers. To tell you the quite honest truth, I've always been really scared of pressure cookers, and I shouldn't be. I know that they work really, really well. Pretty much an Instapot, that's what a pressure cooker is. So I shouldn't be scared of those at all. I just don't personally own one myself. I always cook beans and stuff, the slow way, if you will, and it takes definitely a long time. Now, induction burners are wonderful. I know lots of people that have them. They heat up water super duper fast, but the way they work, they get really, really hot on the bottom. So you're definitely going to have to adjust your temperature a little bit for your pressure cooker, just because the bottom will burn really fast because it heats so quickly. Now, my best advice for this is a little bit of experimentation. Maybe set the induction burner a little lower temperature than you typically would beforehand. But I can't give you a ton of advice on that one. I'm sorry on that one, just because I don't have a lot of experience with either of those. The pressure cooker part is pretty simple, but if it's getting too hot on the bottom, it definitely is going to burn. So that's why I'm saying turning your induction cooking surface down just a little bit, and work it in increments. So maybe start at like a quarter, of the way down that you would from before would kind of be a good place to start with a small batch, see how it goes, and work your way up to the traditional batch that you're normally doing. All right, Debbie, I froze a liquid from the chickpeas to use for aquafaba, and then I read you need to reduce the liquid before freezing or using. Did I ruin the liquid? Can you use it after thawing and then reduce it? Do you reduce yours first? No, actually, Debbie, this is a great question. And you absolutely can freeze aquafaba from the chickpea can, and that's great. You can just put it in ice cube trays and save it for later, so you don't always just have a container of aquafaba in your fridge after using chickpeas. You can reduce it, but I have not found that you needed to. You can just literally let the ice cube melt. You could, heat it up if you wanted to, but you don't need to reduce it to be able to get it to work again. You definitely will want to give it a little bit of mix. So just whisk it a little bit with a whisk or a fork. You should be good to go. So after you thawing it, no need to reduce it. If you want to, you could. It would just intensify the proteins in it a little bit more. So depending on what you're doing with it, like making a meringue or something, it might happen a little quicker. But for a binder, you wouldn't need to use it as much or reduce it at all to make that work. All right, so Bill, how can I make time for cooking? It seems to get busy, and I keep buying pre-made meals. Yeah, so Bill, again for this, I think meal prep is the way to go. So right when you get home from the store, once a week, again, just prep everything that you possibly can that one day and make it simpler for later on in the week. Pre-make your meals, and if you don't want to just do the mise en place ahead of time, you can also make some of the meals ahead of time. So you can make some of the like take the ideas from some of the favorite pre-made meals you've been doing. So pardon me again. So again, if you're you're used to buying like a lasagna pre-made meal, we'll make a lasagna ahead of time that's plant-based, whole food based, whatever you want, and freeze it ahead of time. So that way you have lasagna for, this week and next week or later on, and you just do it in the smaller serving size like you want to be able to have it frozen. And then you can bake it as you need it to be able to make those happen. So just, again, I used to always joke, it's like everybody's always surprised when dinner comes up, when it's time for dinner because they have to make something. Well, it happens every single day. So planning a little bit ahead is always a wonderful thing to do. So again, I always like to use that one day per week where I do the majority of my prep on that day to make the rest of the week easy for me. So it doesn't have to just be mise en place. It can be the entire meal if you want to. So make, 5 meals on the one day for yourself. So it makes it easier for the rest of the week to be able to make it happen. So you can, make your pasta sauce, and then the day of all you have to do is boil your pasta, or something like that along those lines to be able to make that work. Hopefully that works for you. All right, Zach, is flax egg a reliable binder? Also, what's a good measurement to substitute one egg? Yeah, flax egg is a great reliable binder. There's not really a one-to-one ratio measurement on that for substitution because it really depends on what you're binding at the same time. I'm sorry to tell you. Typically, about a tablespoon of flax, ground flax, to 2 tablespoons of water is usually what is the substitute for one egg, but that can vary again depending on what you're using it for. Just make sure it's ground as well before you use it, because if it's not ground, it's not going to bind in the same way. But yeah, you might need to do a little experimentation with that, but that's typically the standard for egg substitute. One egg is to one tablespoon of flax and 2 tablespoons of water. And let that sit for a little bit too, probably at least an hour. All right, Elizabeth, what are some ways to get a tomato-based sauce or stew to balance or reduce acidity? Uh, Baking powder is actually the best way to be able to do that. Just a pinch, not very much, but do that and it'll reduce the acidity right away. And it's not going to be so acidic, but don't overdo it. Just a pinch will actually do it no matter how big the pot is. All right, Jules, I have cooked and baked for our community for many years on a larger scale. Great. 50 to 100 meals per day. That's a lot of meals. Is there a way to post existing photos and recipes? Um, I'm guessing you're asking about this for your classes, and that's not something we would recommend. The classes that, if you're taking one of the classes, let's say you're taking Plant-Based Pro, we're asking you to be able to do the recipes in a certain order. So you're actually learning from each one of those. Even if you've done something like that in the past, it's good to be able to repeat it. You might get something new out of it, even if you've already done it before. If you're looking just to post existing photos and recipes that you love and want to share, we do have a Facebook group, for a lot of the different classes, or just for Ruby in general, or an Instagram that you can definitely post things to and tag us in them, or you can post them on the groups. We have a very active community in our Facebook groups and Instagram, and if you want to share those, it's wonderful. Especially if you're cooking that many meals per day, you probably have some experience in that and know if a recipe works or not. So a lot of people would love to be able to see those, especially in big batches like 50 to 100. I cooked for batches of, hundreds per day for years. And it's an entirely different art than just doing individual meals. So there's a lot of people want to be able to know how to be able to do that. So sharing that would be great. All right, Amy. Um, I read online that there are exclusive Facebook groups. Yep, that's exactly what I was talking about. We can join once we've signed up for a Ruby course. I'm in the Pro Cook course. Do you know of anyone or how we can join the Facebook group? Patrick, if you can post that. Oh, it looks like you already did. I can see those post up on there. So we have different, groups for different courses. Those are wonderful things to be able to get into. And it's great because you have this community of different people that are working with you then. and you can share recipes. You can, show what you posted in one of the courses. Great way to be able to do this. I've even found where it's like, somebody was like, "Oh, I can't find this certain ingredient. Does anybody know where to find this?" I'm like Philadelphia, and five people will say like, "Hey, it's at this place on this corner. You can find it, and it's at this price." And somebody else will be like, "Oh, no, it's cheaper over here." So great groups for something like that. Enjoy, Amy. All right, Jules. I'm signed up for the Forks Over Knives culinary course. Is there a way to fast track through the course or test out? Um, yes and no. So I'm a little confused at why you'd sign up for the class and want to test out of it. Um, but if you're trying to get through the class a little faster, you can always click the completed box on the end of each page. You'll still have to do your assignments for those, and show your work as far as your uploads and things like that for the classes, and then have the instructors grade them. But there isn't really a way to test out of the class. The classes are designed for you to be able to go through and learn different skills. The way they're built out is you learn certain things at the beginning of the course that you'll need later in the course, and you kind of build upon your techniques in that. And I see, Jules, you're also the person that was cooking for 50 to 100, so you probably have a lot of experience. But yeah, as far as testing out, that's not something we really do. If you're taking the class, we're expecting you to be able to follow the class basically and you can do it in different orders if you want to. If you're like, what, I'm not really feeling, making this clear broth today. I want to do something like make seitan. You can do the seitan one first. That's fine, and come back to the clear broth one as well. I think the best way to do that, and I've taken every single one of our Ruby classes, and had like basically did the same thing where I submitted all my recipes, and as an instructor and the director of plant-based culinary, I definitely have a lot of experience in these areas. So I knew a lot of the things I was studying, but it was a good refresher on it. And it was also a good way to interact with other people in the class, and also to be able to get to know the instructors better. So I hope you do that yourself. It's a great way to be able to learn, and you'll definitely learn some new things. I can guarantee it as you go through the course on it. But yeah, there isn't a way to really test out of the class. Sorry for that, Jules. All right, Karen, can you recommend a good knife for the inexperienced cook? A sharp one. That's what I always tell people, is the best knife is a sharp knife. Really, knives are individual, right? So go to a place like I'd recommended before, where if you can go to a place and actually hold a knife, is a great thing to do, because you want to feel how it holds in your hand. I always like to recommend a full tang blade. So you want the blade to go all the way through the handle. You can typically see that because you'll see the metal go actually through the entire handle as well. That way, when you're chopping with it, the knife or the handle is never going to break off from the knife as well, too. There are thousands of different kinds of knives out there, and every knife has definitely got a little bit different thing to it. It doesn't have to be a $600 knife. That's kind of ridiculous for an inexperienced cook. And like just a standard knife that people would use in an experienced kitchen typically aren't going to run more than $60 to $70, right? At the standard knife, and that's like thinking like Wusthof classics and stuff like that aren't going to be too much more than that. But there are other ones that are like $30 knives that are going to work just as great. The important part is you keep it sharp, right? So the sharper your blade is, the better it's going to be for you. The more you're going to be able to get through things, and they're not going to slide off of the thing you're trying to cut. So I'm not going to give you a specific knife, because again, to everybody's hand, it feels a little bit different. So try a couple out in your hand and see what works best for you. And don't feel like you have to buy a super duper expensive knife. You don't have to. If you're inexperienced, you shouldn't be spending $100 on a knife or more than that. Starting out with something that's $30 is totally fine. Just make sure that it's try to keep it where the handle is also made of the same metal that's going through the blade. So it's all one piece. Is a great way to be able to start out. All right, Tracy. Hi, looking for inputs about types of recipes good for teaching, cooking, and getting started. So sounds like you're looking for recipes to teach people. That's great. Um, in my experience, and I've taught cooking classes for years and years, for probably 20 years now. The best thing to do is know your audience, right? So depending on who you're teaching, your recipes are going to be different. If you're teaching for kids, they're going to be much simpler. They're going to be less messy as possible. Um, well, maybe not. I've done a lot of bread classes with kids that got really messy really quick. But just knowing your audience is really where you want to start with. Try not to go too complicated at all. Even if you're talking to people that are experienced, you don't want to have fancy equipment that nobody has at home. You don't want to have techniques that are only that are not replicable, that you can't copy again at their home, right? So try to stick with recipes and techniques that they can do and then they can repeat later on and build upon as well. So try to teach the technique to be able to start something out and then do something else after that with the technique, and then take that same technique and build upon it. Knife skills is actually a great example of this. Knife skills is kind of like the 101, where you start off with knife skills, you learn how to be able to chop different ingredients, and then you take those ingredients and you put them into a saute pan and you do a dry, uh, you know, a saute method, or you put them into a roasting pan and you do a roast method, right? So you're basically building upon each one of those to be able to show different techniques to do those. So technique driven is always the best way. I always like to be able to show people different things in cooking, because once they learn the technique, they can go off and do all kinds of different flavor profiles on their own. That's probably the best advice I can give you, and good luck with that, Tracy. All right, Denise. I'm working with the agar cheese for the plant based cooking class. It turned out to be the consistency of a weird, lumpy mess. I've seen this before. Could it be the agar? Am I not cooking it enough? Am I worried about wasting another batch? I am worried about wasting another batch of cheese. So, Denise, this does happen. Typically, in my experience, when I found that, it's because you're not scraping the bottom of the pan as you're cooking your agar, and the agar is floating to the bottom of the pan. So then when you pour it out of your pan, the agar is still stuck to the bottom of your pan. So that's typically what I see when I see something like that. Is so make sure when you're cooking your agar and the liquid you're doing, that you're taking a spatula and scraping the bottom of the pan to be able to get everything off the bottom of the pan that might be sticking out into the rest of it, so it's all cooking evenly. That's typically where I'm going to see that. The other way that I see agar, and I know this cheese recipe, and I don't think there is, but too much acid can keep agar from binding perfectly. So make sure you're using the recommended amount of agar and the recommended amount of acid. So like lemon, would be something like that. So yeah, I've seen a lot of people in that same activity do the pardon me, the sweet version. And if you're doing like something like an orange agar, it's going to be much less likely to set properly. Okay. All right. So the fourth one is execute. And that is basically executing your flavor development. So, like the very beginning of your cooking process to the end of it, like what am I going to add into it? I'm going to add my garlic into it to have a really big, rich, garlicky flavor. At the end of it, I want to put my spinach in at the very end so it doesn't turn that kind of gray, kind of, wilted, like I always think of collard greens in that same way, where they're pretty much cooked till they're dead, right? So put your spinach at the end so you have a brightness and a vibrance to it to be able to help with that. So those are your 4 steps basically on the cooking. If you're calling it the cooking wheel, but I think you're talking about the map of cooking. I hope that helps. All right, so here's one from Errol. Can someone achieve all their nutrients by plant based prepping, especially meeting their protein requirements when starting at basic level? Can you provide a guided walkthrough to help someone who struggles with food prep? So, this we kind of talked about earlier as well, too. Really kind of picking out a day to be able to start out, what you're going to prep ahead of time. Now, getting all your nutrients is actually a pretty easy thing to do, depending on what way you're eating. But if like you're looking for protein, you're going to get a lot of protein just from what you're eating on average. I do know some people that exercise religiously in tons that are like, professional athletes that I've talked to that definitely needed more protein in their diet. And they definitely, added more protein rich foods to their diet. So they used to do things like whey proteins, So what I talked to them about was making something with a protein rich, like smoothie or something like that instead of the whey, smoothie. So they would do something like a quinoa and blend it up in a soy milk with different, flavors and stuff into it to be able to get that high protein, both out of the soy and the quinoa that they were doing. But then also making sure to get those high protein things in every single meal. Where if you're just eating whole food plant based, you don't have to worry about that much because you're getting proteins just out of regular foods. You'd be surprised how much protein you're getting. But if you are an avid athlete and you need more protein, you might want to just make sure that you're focusing on your meal prep to get more protein for each meal for those. So basing like a salad and adding quinoa to it, or doing tofus or tempehs or different things that have higher proteins in those. But if you start looking up the protein counts on a lot of even the vegetables, you'll see that you're getting a lot of protein just through every meal as well. So I hope that helps, Errol. Can you provide us, from Miriam, can you provide us with the best types of pots for cooking and why? Um, hmm. That I would have to say is entirely up to the dishes you're making. And you're probably saying, like, do you want stainless steel or do you want aluminum? I pretty much avoid aluminum pans altogether because aluminum tends to leach into the food, so I usually just avoid those. Stainless steel is kind of my go-to. I will use nonstick pans pretty often too, but with nonstick pans, they scratch so easy, and I make sure to, and definitely do the same. As I don't use any kind of like metal tools on a nonstick pan because you can scratch the surface easy. And as soon as I see any kind of scratches on my nonstick pans, I get rid of them. So I don't buy expensive nonstick pans. Like I used to have an all-clad nonstick pan, and when it starts to scratch like that, you can't do anything with it anyways, because then you're eating that nonstick stuff, and you don't want that. So I typically will buy my nonstick pans from like a restaurant supply store. So when I get something like that, I'm only spending like $30 on the pan. And after a couple years, and I see the bottom starts to scratch up a little bit, I'll get rid of it and I'll spend the other $30 and not worry about it. Now, when it comes to stainless steel, like I said before, what I did was I saved up and I bought a really good, pan. And I'd start off with just like a 10-inch saute pan. And then I might get a 10-inch fry pan, 2 years later after saving up for it. And those were stainless steel ones. And now I have like a whole set where I have the saucepans and the stock pots and all those other things too. But those can get expensive when they're stainless steel. So start off with your saute or fry pan, a saucepan, and that's probably going to be what you need to start with. And stainless, I think, is probably a good place to start in those two. Hope that helps. All right, Ken. Hi, Dan. I like to no oil saute onions, garlic, and tomato on my gas stove in a stainless steel fry pan. I set my heat to medium high and do the water test for the mercury ball. And I add my onions. Please advise on the heat settings from that point on. So you're working this just great. So once you get your mercury ball, you put your onions in. Your onions are going to start to naturally release those natural sugars, and they'll start to brown the bottom of the pan. We've all seen this browning on the bottom of the pan. The old chef adage is you never leave the brown on the bottom of the pan because that's where all the flavor is. Those are the natural sugars coming off of the onions on your pan. So what you want to do is deglaze your pan, which is just rinse with water, just a tablespoon or two to be able to get the brown off the bottom of the pan and back onto those onions. And once they get to the browning that you want the onions, and you can add your garlic and tomato to it afterward. You don't want to add the garlic too early because it'll burn quicker than the actual onions will. So adding those after you get your onions caramelized is great. Then putting your tomato and garlic into it afterward on that is basically where you want to go from there. So make sure you're actually doing a true caramelization of your onions afterward, or you're getting them at least to the point where you want them, if you just want them a little see-through or just loose. That's where you want to get them to, and then add the garlic and the tomatoes can go in at the same time. All All right, so I hope that helps, Ken. Monica, can I use nut butters, vegan yogurt, or tofu instead of butter or oil and yeast breads? Thank you. Yes, you totally can. It's actually a very common thing to do. Is all of those things from nut butters to vegan yogurt or tofu are all used in breads instead of butter and oil to be able to keep that moisture. And applesauce is actually another one that you don't have on here that are great things to be able to use in those. So happy cooking. Marion, recently in office hours, you recommended that graduates redo Ruby courses on their own. I'm redoing the plant based pro certification courses and relearning things I'd forgotten or rushed by and trying different recipes for activities. Great advice. Thanks. I'm glad you're enjoying that, Marion. I love that. When going back and looking at all the things that you've learned before, there are certainly things that you're going to miss. So, going back through the course again is a wonderful way to be able to revisit some of the activities you might have skipped over because of timing, because I get it. If you're taking some of these classes, you're like, oh, do you get this done on time? And sometimes you choose one recipe, but you don't choose the other. So it's like, I'm going to choose this recipe instead going in there. So it's a great way to re-explore and really get the most money out of your classes as well, too. So I'm glad you're enjoying it, Marianne. All right, so Suzanne, good afternoon, chef. I want to try making a tofu scramble for the first time. If adding colonamic black salt for the egg taste, how much would be added for one block of medium firm tofu? Do you press out the water first? Thanks for your insight. I do press out the water first if I'm doing a tofu scramble. And if you're using black salt, you don't need much of it. What makes that egg flavor in the black salt is actually the sulfur. So it kind of goes big. So you just need a little pinch of it to put into it. So just put a little pinch of that black salt into it. After you're cooking everything else, I usually put that in at the very end. So if you want like mushrooms or onions in, do those first, then your tofu, and then your turmeric and your other ingredients. And then once it gets to the time where it's almost done, then do your black salt over the top of it and do a mix. Just do a taste, to be able to see if it's where you want it. If it needs a little more of the sulfur taste, add a little bit more, but a little goes a long way in black salt. So I put just a little tiny pinch in and it does just fine if I use it. Most of the times I don't actually use it, but for some people, it works really well. And some people, sometimes when I have guests over, they like it more than just the plain one that I do. All right, so Nicole, what can I use as a replacement for vegan butter and pasta to help them with sticking together? Thank you. Replacement for, so you're just trying to get the pasta not to stick together. Any sauce really is what you want to use. Basically, what the pasta is sticking together because the starch is basically coming out too, and they're sticking together like that. So instead of a butter, just use any kind of a sauce. I mean, if you use oil would do the same thing. But a marinara sauce, any kind of sauce that you're using would help them from sticking together. So I hope that helps a little bit. Zach, can a cleaver be sharpened in the same motion as a chef knife, or is it better to do it by section? Yeah. So if you're using, like we show how to sharpen a knife on a knife block, you can use the exact same technique as you're taking the cleaver and going along the edge of that stone. You should be able to do it in the same technique. And I would do it definitely as one long stroke instead of by section. All right. So Hillary, any recommendations for purchasing a mandolin slicer? Try to find one that has a guard on it. I can't tell you how many friends and family members I've had lose the tips of their fingers from using mandolins. So get one that actually has a guard on it. So when you're putting the food on the mandolin slicer, you have a guard on the top that will protect your fingers. I also recommend getting a cut glove. And a cut glove is just a glove you can put on the hand you're using with it that you could literally drag a knife through your hand and it wouldn't cut it. So using a cut glove with mandolins, good idea. Pardon me one more time. All right. How do vinegars, soy sauces fit into the whole food plan when cooking? In a lot of different ways. I actually love to add vinegars. It's almost like a finisher for certain things. It brings a brightness to different dishes as well. Soy sauces, there's so many different ways that both vinegars and soy sauces fit into whole food cooking. It really just depends on the dishes. I use soy sauces a lot and tamaris as a salt replacer. I don't really use salt that much at all in my cooking, but I will use tamari, which actually has a sodium content to it. It'll also add a little bit of umami flavor to it, depending on the soy sauce or the tamari you're using. But the vinegars definitely brighten up a dish where the soy sauce might add a little bit of sodium and a little bit of umami to it. But again, there's so many different uses for both of those ingredients in whole food and plant-based cooking or just cooking in general. That's a pretty big rabbit hole we could go down. All right, so Suzanne, what's the best and easiest way to clean a pasta maker? Thanks. Yeah, those get messy pretty quick. I honestly, I use like it's like a little brush that has a soap kind of thing built into it, or a brush on a handle, and those are the best way because they tell you not to like submerge them in water. So that's basically what I do is I'll take the brush and get it really wet, and then kind of go between all the cracks and the nooks and crannies in it. If you're using like the flat one to start out, making sure that you're rolling it to be able to get anything that's left over on the inside of that too is really good. But a good brush, get it soapy, brush it out, and then get it completely no soap at all, and make sure you're brushing it out to be able to get any soap out of it as well. And again, use the crank on the side, or if you're using like a KitchenAid version, crank the little thing that the KitchenAid turns to be able to get any of the rollers to come out too, so there's nothing being stuck on the inside. That's a tough one though. They are a little hard to clean, but a good brush will help you on that. All right, Anne, when you open a can of chickpeas, how long can you keep the aquafaba in the fridge? That's a great question. I typically, tell people about 5 days at most on something like that. Like if you're taking it out of the can, but like we said earlier in this, freezing it's a great option. So take an ice cube tray and pour the aquafaba into an ice cube tray, and then you can freeze it and use it anytime you want. But if you're just opening it and putting it in the fridge, 5 days is kind of a shelf life for something like that. If it's a little over, you're okay, but I would say 5 days is your limit. All right, Lily, do you think that a tofu press is an important tool in the kitchen? Depends on what you call a tofu press. I've never owned a legit tofu press. That's great. I have friends that have them and it's a thing in their kitchen, but I have enough things in my kitchen. What I use is a bowl, and then I wrap the tofu in a towel, and then I put a plate on top of that, and then put a tea pitcher on top of the plate in the bowl on top of it. And that's my tofu press. That works brilliantly. It works every single time. It's not fancy, and I don't have to store other gadgets in my kitchen. So is it important? I would say not. But if you love tofu and you want to press and it's something you think you need, go for it. That's great. But it's definitely not something you need in a kitchen by any means. Miriam, how do you keep tofu moist in my regular oven? So if you're cooking with it and you want to keep it moist, a marinade is probably your best bet. The reason we're talking about pressing tofu is to be able to get a lot of that moisture out of it, to be able to help dry it out and get a different texture to it. You don't have to press the tofu in order to be able to get that as well. So you can keep it moist, but a marinade is actually going to be able to help keep it moist. If you're cooking it in your oven, you might want to check on it halfway through, flip it over, and then baste the outside with the marinade as well. So basically taking some of the marinade with a spoon and pouring it over the top of that tofu to be able to help keep it moist. All right, so Ellie or Elle, overgrown bay plant I can use and share with neighbors. Overgrown bay plant I can share with neighbors. Owner asked about monetizing it. Not that it's your area, but could he monetize it? Do you have ideas? Overgrown bay plant. I'm not exactly sure what you're asking here. Um, yeah, I'm sure. Sorry, I'm not exactly what you're asking on that. I guess bay leaves is what you're asking about. And if Yeah, could you clip the leaves and sell them? Sure. You'd have to have a lot of bay leaves though to be able to monetize that. But if you have like a little garden stand or something like that, yeah, you totally could. You could sell them fresh or you could sell them dried. Most people would do them dried, but fresh is also has its own place. Um, But if you have a ton of them, yeah, that's great. Go ahead and set up your little stand to be able to help sell them. Probably be easier to be able to sell that with other things instead of just on its own, but you'd have to have a lot of bay leaves to be able to monetize in a bigger way. All right, so Zach, what's the longest tofu can be marinated before it starts to crumble? A lot of recipes I come across as averages 15 to 30 minutes. I have marinated tofu for a week, and it's been fine. It depends on when you like how much of the moisture you press out of it as well too. So yeah, like a really firm tofu, I've definitely marinated it for a week. Does it start to crumble a little bit? Yeah, but not like anything significant. It's not going to fall apart on you. But as I was saying, when I prep things ahead of time, I'll typically do tofu in that same lot. So I'll be marinating tofu in my fridge. So I wouldn't say a week, but I guess it's been like 4 to 5 days, and it's been fine, and you don't have to worry about that at all. All right. Aixa, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Is there a way to tell a good recipe from a bad one? There is, but that's a little hard to explain. Um, pardon me. Um, if let's see, is there a way to some triggers that I will see if it's a good or a bad recipe? If in your head you're basically putting it together and you know it's not going to work, you're probably right. There are some trickier things though. Sometimes you just have to test recipes. I've tested recipes for a lot of friends, for a lot of different books, for a lot of different things. And part of it is just testing it to see how it's going to go. But if you're looking at a recipe on the page, it's really hard to be able to tell if it's going to work or not. After you've cooked it, that's when you know if it's a good or a bad recipe. If it's a good recipe, it's fantastic. It tastes just like it should. If it's a bad recipe, it seems like something didn't go right. Right. So I did this on a recipe the other day where I made blueberry oat bars for my family, and I followed a recipe out of a book to the T just because I had not made this particular one. And when it came out, it was much too gooey. And I knew exactly what was wrong was that they told me to soak my dates in apple juice. And they told it was like a cup of dates to a cup and a half of apple juice. And when I did that, after I blended it all up and put it into the oats were super, super moist. There's just too much liquid in it. So the next time I made it, I reduced the liquid by at least a half a cup. It might have been more. And I just knew that the recipe was a little different than had been written. Some things to take into account on those too depends on where you are elevation wise. Things cook longer at different elevations, so that might be part of the recipe too. But so yeah, the short answer is to be able to just look at something on the page, you have to have a lot of experience to know if the recipe is going to work out or if it's not going to. The best way is really to try it out and then see for yourself. All right, so Lily B, after finishing the Forks Over Knives courses, are there other cooking classes I can take if I want to continue learning in this area? Yeah, actually, the Plant Based Pro class is a wonderful course for people after finishing the Forks Over Knives class. There's also a meal planner class by Forks Over Knives too. But the Plant Based Pro is definitely the big one that most people take after the Forks Over Knives one. We'll see you in the class, Lily. All right, Miriam, thank you very much for all the information. I rearranged my refrigerator after the second unit. Great. That's wonderful. So, yeah, that is one of the things that we ask people to do is to be able to look at those and see what you need and what you don't. So that actually concludes our live course for today on the Ask Me Anything hours. Thank you so much for joining us. Can't wait to see you for the next one. And happy cooking and have a wonderful day.